in Portuguese, considering that the rest of the session will be in English. Então, boa tarde a todos. Chamo-me Natasha e Operações. Antes de mais, gostaria de agradecer a todos vocês pela vossa presença neste webinar, para dizer que a sessão de hoje será um pouco diferente das outras, dado que estaremos a falar de um conceito que, embora esteja presente em todas as nossas mentes, acredito que continua sendo um pouco abstrato. Então, nomeadamente neste webinar, como todos vocês já sabem, iremos conversar sobre a resiliência de mercado, e nomeadamente como avaliar a resiliência e integrar isto nos nossos negócios, seja como setor privado, seja como implementadores, mas também para governos e doadores com quem nós trabalhamos. Hoje temos o prazer de ter juntado vários líderes neste setor de resiliência do mercado, que irão abordar o assunto, vamos dizer, de uma maneira mais prática e sucinta. E pronto, quero salientar que este webinar serve mais como um petisco, que depois do evento iremos partilhar alguns relatórios e alguns outros dados mais elaborados que a nossa audiência possa também seguir. Então, por favor, estejam atentos a isso. Iremos começar com a contextualização do tema da resiliência no ecossistema do mercado, onde contamos com a presença da senhora doutora Tatiana Pulido. Ela é a diretora de evidência e aprendizagens e dados no Departamento de Engajamento com o Setor Privado na USAID em Washington. A seguir, teremos a minha colega Alina Renau, que é a diretora de monitoria e avaliação na IDE Mozambique. Ela irá compartilhar alguns dados sobre a avaliação da resiliência que nós na IDE fizemos no corredor da Beira, usando o nosso instrumento chamado MSDN, Market Systems Resilience Index. Desculpa, onde haver muitos destes acrônimos hoje. E nesta sessão, a Alina irá levantar algumas reflexões de como é que nós na IDE estamos a fortalecer a resiliência do mercado. A última apresentação será liderada pelo Sr. Ben Fowler e a Sra. Megan Bolden, de MarketShare Associates, e acho que muitos de vocês conhecem a MSA. A MSA é um líder no desenvolvimento econômico que desde 2019 tem estado a apoiar o setor público e privado e multilateral em 6 continentes diferentes. Como a Arcília também indicou, iremos concluir com uma discussão em aberto sobre os temas levantados e também para dizer que sintam-se à vontade de ir colocando questões no chat que nós iremos tentar abordar o máximo possível. Então, acho que com isso vou passar a palavra à senhora Tatiana. Tatiana, over to you to get us started. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Natasha, and welcome. Thank you, everyone, for participating and inviting me to speak a little bit around market systems resilience. As the slides are being shared with you and put up on the screen, I just wanted to provide a bit of background on how we arrived at this concept. So roughly 3 years ago, we here at USAID did a stock taking of our approaches to market systems measurement, deliberately considering our lenses of competitiveness, inclusion, and resilience, the 3 things that we hope to enhance in places where USAID works. And as we did this, we realized that we had pretty much nothing to assess market systems resilience. So began a really interesting journey, which has involved many and has brought us here today to try to catch everyone up on what we've been learning. So that said, while the theory and the tools and concepts I'm about to present to you around market systems resilience has advanced during this time, field use, application, while growing rapidly, is still something that's in development, and we have much to learn still. So we don't really expect everybody to fully grasp this. Like I think as Natasha was saying, this is very conceptual, as we're still learning and modifying what it is that market system resilience means through our application and implementation. Also, I think that in light of COVID-19 and the pandemic, the need to understand this theory and what resilience in markets looks like is becoming much more urgent. A final note is just that I'm going to be using a couple of examples from USAID and the Feed the Future initiative, which is around food security. But these concepts that I'm about to speak to are something that can be applied to any market. Next slide. So to begin with, while there is no official USAID definition for market systems resilience, what you see here on this slide is a working definition that speaks to the ability of the market system to draw on resources and solve problems when it faces a shock or a stress. What's particularly interesting in market systems resilience is that while much emphasis is put on large, rapid onset shocks, such as experiencing an extreme weather event, in current household and community resilience work, we are seeing that initial indications that long-term stressors, such as corruption, migration, households having to deal with HIV/AIDS illnesses, those can be just as disturbing for the market system, if not more so. Next, ultimately, the market systems resilience is about managing risk to retain the functionality for the benefit of our target populations. That is the core of our definition here at USAID. In most places that we work, the best proxy to understand market systems resilience is the work and the actions and behaviors used by the firms. And so we tend to really focus on understanding firms and business dynamics within the market system around how they're managing and mitigating risk. And that is because businesses are the ones that tend to be the most sensitive to the changes in the market. So by assessing how they interact within the system, we can understand not only just the potential challenges to efficiencies and inclusion in the market system, but also to its fragility, right? One clarification point, though, is that even while we really focus on the firm and the business actor in the market system to really understand resilience and the dynamics in the market system, what this means is this doesn't mean that market systems resilience is about making each individual firm or business resilient. There's a critical difference from how we think about resilience at the household level, where we ideally want every household to be resilient and escape poverty, for example. But within the market system, we understand that firm entry and exit to maintain innovation and competition contributes to the health of a market system. So market systems resilience does not mean the resilience of each individual business, because that churn of new businesses starting and other businesses ceasing to exist is perfectly healthy for a market system. And so one of the key research questions that we often grapple with is then how do you improve resilience in the market system when we recognize that some of the businesses should fail? Next. So now that we've explored, or I've defined a little bit of what market systems resilience means, why do we even care here at USAID? First, we recognize that the market systems where we work, risk is typically pushed onto the most vulnerable market actor. So in agri-food systems and food security, that would be small scale producers and small businesses. This matters because we know that resilience as a capacity at different levels is interlinked. So the resilience of the household is linked to the resilience of the community and the market system in which it engages. So if we're serious about improving resilience at the household level, then we need to think about market systems resilience as well. And as we engage with market systems, we should also be thinking about how we can help shift the risk to actors better able to manage it. So for example, in the Feed the Future Innova activity here in Mozambique, they facilitated a new last mile distribution model for agricultural inputs. And this model is based on regular fixed delivery routes to retailers to fulfill catalog orders for a national distributor. And so in shifting this business model, the inventory holdings were moved more from the vulnerable small retailers back to the large national distributor who can better manage inventory risk and more easily access finance to support that inventory. In this case, reaching the last mile smallholder and growing the inputs market was the primary goal. but that change also provided resilience benefits to the market system. Next slide, please. So markets are, if you think about it, really inherently resilient, right? And that is why it's so hard for us to change them in the first place. They are complex adaptive systems. They are constantly responding to a variety of reorganizing and stimuli and changes. They always have been and always will be. And this is just a neutral fact. That's neither a good thing or a bad thing. However, for USAID and many other donors, resilience has become a positive normative construct. So what we mean is that we want these behaviors that are natural and common within the market system and that help provide and bolster resilience within the markets to be something that is more of a positive behavior that has a value, right? So we need to sit comfortably with the tension between this neutral quality of resilience that keeps a market existing in a complex system, and this development concept that resilience capacities are supporting continued development progress in the state of some sort of shock or stress. So all to put it much simpler, essentially what we care about is that these resilience capacities can help mitigate or diffuse the impact of a shock or a stress and help shorten the recovery time so that we can reach development objectives. Also, how the recovery happens matters as much as diffusing the impact. So for example, we don't want power dynamics to shift to increase exclusion or extractive behaviors that cause harm to our populations of interest. We don't want the quality of the products to deteriorate, like food safety, that further then disadvantage the poor. Next, please. This brings me to this lovely illustration that we've adapted and developed. It captures the idea of how the recovery phase after a shock or after a significant stress could have very different trajectories depending on the capacities of the system. So we've refashioned the original concept to similarly show different trajectories after the disturbance, depending on the ability of the market to absorb some of that risk and diffuse some of that risk. So the whole idea behind the body of work around market systems resilience is that the right system capacities can flatten that curve in the impact of the disturbance so that you don't feel too much of a disturbance, and therefore, at the very least, enhance the curve of recovery. Next. So speaking now a little bit more about what determines market systems resilience, and unfortunately, as with anything new, there is no definitive list. What we did here at USAID is we held a meeting back in October 2019 with key stakeholders in the development and humanitarian sectors to discuss our experiences around market systems resilience strengthening. And at this meeting, we arrived at a general consensus on what determines market systems resilience, even though, as you will probably notice through the various presentations, different tools and frameworks have named and grouped these determinants slightly differently. I don't really have time to go through each one, but I had shared a handout earlier, which hopefully you had all received with the actual definitions of these determinants, and I'm sure that we can make it available during this presentation as well. And just a couple of things to keep in mind here. With these determinants of market systems resilience, more is not always better. Balance and context matter more than the absolute measure. So there really isn't a right answer in terms of what each one of these determinants should look like in a market system, because it depends so much on the context. Second, I also want to reiterate that this isn't a definitive list. So as I mentioned earlier, we're at early stages in terms of understanding market systems resilience and market systems development. strengthening. So this is one of a handful of conceptually similar approaches to give you, just to help you understand a little bit, perhaps more concretely, what it is that market systems resilience refers to. So on that note, next slide, please. I can give you another example of a mental model. This one was developed for our USAID Kenya programs that center around resilience. And as you can see here, you see some similar determinants, and they're grouped into two different structures. One is structural determinants, so that speak to the rules, right, and the structure of the system, and then the other is behavioral. In this mental model, and in this approach to what market systems resilience means, what's particularly interesting is that these determinants sit on this continuum where there must be a balance to create a positive market system, which is in essence a market system that can neutralize or mitigate risk through innovation and problem solving. And then on the other end of this continuum, you can end up with a mix and a balance of determinants that lead to a reactive market system. And that's one that is just focused on accumulating resources for a very small group of people to withstand the shock or stress, doesn't really care about everybody within that market being able to weather that storm. So once again, I want to emphasize that building market systems resilience is really about finding the balance more than getting the absolute number of one of these. More is not better. And while we are striving here in market systems resilience, what we are trying to do here, in essence, is described as a positive market system, right? It's a system that can evolve to help manage risk. It's a market that can help evolve to manage risk and retain functions, retain products, be able to provide services despite the shock or stress, and do so in a very competitive and inclusive manner. Final slide, please. We have a lot of resources, which I welcome you to take a look at via this page on our USAID Market Links website. And with that, then let me turn it back over to Natasha to continue our panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tatiana. That was really helpful and really insightful. One of the things that really resonated with me as you were speaking to that was really just this need to find a balance and have systems that are able to evolve to manage risk. And I think that's a really great way to kind of tee up Lina's presentation as well. So maybe I'll pass the ball over to Lina to speak a little bit more specifically to a concrete application of the IDE Market Systems Resilience Index within the Mozambique context, specifically the Beira corridor. Lina, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Tatiana, thank you very much for your presentation. And as Natasha says, is the perfect preamble to ours. So my name is Lina now. I am the M&E Director of IDE Mozambique, and I'm going to be talking about the Market System Resilience Index. Next slide. So the MSRI, it's basically a tool, one of its kind, and the first market resilient system tool that is bringing together households and a system level metric to have an idea of how a snapshot of the resilience in a particular geographical area. In this case, we studied the Beira corridor, that is Manica and Sofala, and the main purpose of it is to understand what market system factors affect the resilience of market actors and households. Next slide, please. Next slide. So how it began was with Mozambique being affected badly by different types of shocks and stressors, mainly Cyclone Idai and COVID, and it left us thinking, how can we reduce dependency? How can we reduce vulnerability? How can we increase competitiveness and inclusiveness of the market? How can we blend market market needs, with farmers' needs, and take advantage of the whole farm market dynamic. How can we work towards improving the fragmented supply chains, the thin markets, particularly in agriculture in Mozambique, while engaging farmers and making sure that they are benefiting from it. Next one, please. So this led us to our market resilience and rebuilding initiative, where throughout input, technology and trade fairs, and input suppliers, farmer field schools, farmer business advisors, we have reached a total of 48,000 smallholders. And while implementing this initiative, we're thinking, okay, how can we measure, how can we evaluate that actually at a market system level, our implementations are making sense or are not, and we should ship them and improve them. So particularly for the context of Mozambique, the MSRI, we wanted to understand, okay, how these shocks that are becoming every day more frequent in Mozambique and in the whole world, and what is the effect of these shocks in the market in different actors? How can we have let's say a snapshot of the market system resilience in a certain geography? How can we analyze that in terms of how can we fill in the gaps? How can we strengthen the things that are working well in terms of programmatic and even policy? Next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the methodology. I hope that it doesn't feel rushed because it's been a very long process. So basically what I was saying at the beginning is this current version of MSRI that we're calling MSRI 2 is a blend of a household resilience metric called SHARP by FAO and a market resilience metric that was initially our MSRI 1 by IDE. So one was households, the other one was market actors, and now in our current one, we're mixing and blending the whole ecosystem. Next one. To show a little bit the conceptual framework, the SHARP household resilience metric had 13 agro-ecosystem indicators for households. Talking to resilience, and our initial MSRI had 9 determinants that, if you following on Tatiana's presentation, this was very much guided by conceptual frameworks developed by USAID. And some of the determinants here in the MSRI, you can link them directly to what Tatiana was presenting. So basically, we merged both of those tools, and we ended up having the conceptual framework on your left, on your right. Next slide, please. We have 5 different principles with its determinants. So for example, market structure of the market, the determinants that fall into it are redundancy, diversity and functionality, connectivity of the market. The determinants that fall into it are inclusion, integration, and collaboration. For market support are feedback loops, enabling environments, and preparedness. For environment is the physical environment, and for financial is financial viability of the market and access to finance. All of the determinants have a score, all of the principles have a score, and they feed into an overall score for each market actor. Next slide, please. So we're going to be changing the slides quite fast as I move from the steps. So this is a little bit of an explanation on the journey. So initially we conducted a market assessment, to understand which were the market actors in the market. Next one. Then we selected which were the most important actors in the Mozambican Beira corridor context. And we identify output market actors, retailers, input suppliers, and households. Next one. And then we developed modular questionnaires for each market actor. Next. And based on the quantitative questions that all of them had scores, we calculated the score for each determinant, for each principle, and then overall index. We also have mandatory and non-mandatory questions, let's say quantitative and qualitative questions. The qualitative questions, next slide, are waiting for us to have a further and in-depth analysis of many other factors that are not quantitative or can be quantified related with resilience that also need to be studied. Next one, please. So for the first MSRI Mozambique data collection took place a year ago in our input trade fairs in October. We surveyed a total of 333 market actors, then being 295 households, 10 input suppliers, 23 retailers, and 5 market output actors. Next one. And I am going to talk about some of the results. So the overall MSRI score for the actors that we are analyzing is here. This is a score that is over 5. And here we can see that input suppliers are the actors, the market actors that have the highest score, followed by retailers, followed by output market actors, and being households, the actor with the lowest score. It's important to note as well that there is not a huge difference among actors in the Vera corridor. We could have expected the difference between households and market actors to be much bigger than what we saw with the index. Next one. So this is a very visual representation of the index and a little bit of what I was talking about of the 5 principles that are the middle donut, let's say, and then the outer layer donut are the determinants, and in the center is the score, the overall score. So households, the MSRI score for households for Mozambique is 2.87, which is a relatively low score. We can see that collaboration is the principle that scored the lowest, and the determinants that fall into this principle are inclusion, integration, and collaboration. And more than talking about numbers, like what this means, for example, so collaboration could suggest that households in the Vera corridor don't collaborate in the sense that they are not part of associations or groups that help farmers to aggregate their product or to decrease transport to reach to a market place. Inclusion can be understood as low participation of women and systemically excluded groups in the market. On the other hand, the principle that scored the highest was structured, and it was led, and the determinant that was the highest was the redundancy. This was a very interesting finding because this can be related with farmers having multiple options to buy and to buy inputs for their production and to sell their products. So from these results, and we will share an in-depth report on this, there is space for so much programmatic improvement and recommendations. So engaging farmers to further collaborate, increasing the involvement of input and output linkages to reach last mile, foster participation of women and other groups in the market, and support regulatory framework. Next slide, please. This it's another visual representation, and now it helps understanding the magnitude of the score in each determinant. So we can see easily here that redundancy, that was what I was speaking, was the highest score, the highest determinant for households, as as well as feedback loops, as I was saying. It can be all easily see as well that Manica and Sofala have very similar trends for their redundancy scores by determinant. However, Manica has slightly higher resilience scores than Sofala. We didn't show this here, but it could also be seen that households that have higher incomes are more resilient as opposed to the ones that have lower incomes. We can pass. Now, shifting to the supply side of the market, the overall MSR score for market actors is 3.3, which is relatively higher than for households. The principle where market actors score the highest is the financial principle, and the determinant that scored the highest was feedback loops. This also was a very interesting finding for us, because we also participated in the data collection, and we spoke with a lot of retailers, and we actually saw. Sorry. And we actually saw that retailers in particular have really good mechanisms to get feedback from their clients, if they're satisfied, if the seed doesn't work, if they have any other concerns with the termination. It was a very interesting finding, and we would like to further understand what these mechanisms look like in different places. We saw that certain retailers, for example, had publicity in the radio to announce to their clients when the rains are coming and when was the right time to plant, and so on. We can change. This is another representation of other subgroups that we are studying. As I said, suppliers have a higher resilience score, Manica as well. In terms of districts, for the ones that are familiar with Mozambique, Buzi and Susundenga had the higher scores. And for us, also one of the main or most interesting results was that firm sizes that were in the middle in terms of their employees, so between 11 and 50, had higher resilience scores, as well as firms that had a middle range of annual turnover. We trying to understand this with the reality. We do see that retailers that are the ones that sort of fall into these categories are the ones that are in the ground, are the ones that are interacting with the farmers, are the ones that are hearing the feedback from the farmers, are the ones that, because of their size, that it's relatively small, can adapt faster, are the ones that in general understand better their clients. So this was a very interesting finding from our side, and to say that we need to work with these guys that are in the ground and are the ones that are delivering and giving face-to-face service to the farmers in the Vera corridor. Next. This is again the spider web representation of all the actors. So we're having the demand and can we go back? Can we go back, please? Okay, so here we are seeing the 4 market actors: households, inputs, retailers, and output market actors. What we can take from here is that we can see across these 4 actors that their resilience structure is different. It's interesting to see that retailers and input suppliers that basically belong to the same business, but we just differentiate them by their size, have very similar patterns and scores in their determinants, which is the green and the orangey lines. Then if we go to our output market actor, that is a completely different business. As for our sample, are bigger businesses. Sometimes they are not only at a national level, but also international. They export. Their trends are completely different. They scored very badly in inclusion. they score high in collaboration, and which is quite related in reality, because with the ones that we spoke that are more in the capital, that are the big players, they actually work together and know each other. Also, in terms of financial, they had the highest determinant, because they are not only domestic but also international. And one topic that was also very interesting for us is the enabling environment. This understood by policies, supports from NGOs, legal or laws, regulations, and in general, supply side market said that the government sometimes didn't make things as easiest in terms of regulation for them. For the big ones, for the small ones, they said that there's a lot of barriers to entry into the market. And for households, they don't perceive that they've been helped, or that there are particular laws to improve their livelihoods. We can change now. And part of the analysis for the index, it's, as I said, is to understand the impact of shocks and stressors. And we had different results for households. It was clear that the shock that affected most of the households, above 90%, are climatic shocks related to droughts, floods, cyclones, and so on, which was very different to the supply side of the market, which they reported that the type of shock that affected them the mostly was COVID in terms of their business, followed by climatic shocks. Can we move the last one? It was interesting. Can we go back? Sorry. Well, it was interesting for us to know that there's different recovery times. They recover faster from their output markets, recover faster from COVID, and took much longer to recover from climatic changes, shocks. And we saw how much vulnerable in terms of shocks are households than market actors. They recover much faster than households as well. Next. So what's next? We are going to share a report for the MSDN report in Mozambique, which has greater detail and further recommendations. We are going to implement this month the digital input trade and technology fairs in Manica, Sofala, and Zambezia this time, and it's going to be changing from the last ones. This is going to be co-participating fair. We are asking farmers to also give their contribution. We are going to start doing a second round of data collection for MSRI. We hope to see changes over time. We are working on graduating our farmer field schools that have gone through 3 seasons of teaching, and we are continuing our market field days to link market actors, particularly input suppliers and retailers, with our farmers. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lina. That was really comprehensive and very insightful. To say that one of the things that really stuck out from my side, and maybe we can talk a little bit more about this in the panel discussion, is really this focus on the mid-level market actors, and really just that interesting breakdown between input suppliers versus retailers, and what that kind of means for organizations like IDE, but others within the Mozambique space. As the organizers are teeing up the presentations for Ben, maybe I can ask Ben and Megan to start introducing themselves and speak a little bit more specifically to MSA's approach to construction for resilience assessments as well, and maybe some practical applications of what that might look like. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, everybody. I'm really looking forward to this. I'll be presenting today alongside my colleague, Megan Bolden. As to a little bit of background to myself, I'm a co-founder and a principal at MarketShare Associates. I've spent nearly 20 years working on creating and measuring social impact, and done so with a range of different organizational types, including governments, multinational corporations, small and growing businesses, and others. I'll pass it over to Megan to give a brief overview of herself.
Thanks, Ben. Hi, everyone. I am Megan Bolden. I lead MarketShare's monitoring, evaluation, and learning practice. I've worked most of my career in agricultural market systems over the last 15 years, mostly on the implementation side with action-oriented research. So data use, what do you do with the data you collect for decision makers on your own projects, but also your partners and the stakeholders you work with. And I'm really excited to have a lot of my colleagues who've worked with me on today's research on the call as well. So hope the panel discussion, they can chime in as well.
Great. All right, so we'll tee it off. What we really wanted to do, and we kind of have the luxury of going third here, I think, because it means we've heard so much from Tatiana about the bigger picture with MSR, some of the background research and thinking that's gone into it, so we don't have to repeat that. Then we've heard a lot of the practical details of putting it into practice in Mozambique from IDE. So I think we can really use our time to add on to those rather than really duplicate what you've already heard. So with that, let's move to the next slide, just to give a little bit of an overview to who MarketShare Associates is, in case you're not aware. We're a social impact-driven consulting company. We come to this presentation having spent a lot of time working on MSR across a range of countries, including Mozambique, and our mission is bringing actionable insights to economic development. Quick highlight on some of the things that we do as a company. We focus on actionable research, action research rather. We help design and implement monitoring systems that generate insights. We provide strategic advisory support. We conduct evaluations, and we also engage in research, thought leadership, and dissemination. So we wanted to start with a little bit of a background. How have we got here, and what's been our own journey into understanding and applying MSR? For us, it really started about 8 years ago with the research that we started doing on how to better understand ways to measure systemic change. So we did research for the Donor Committee for Enterprise Development, as well as for USAID. And among other things, that culminated in the publication of the disruptive system dynamics framework for measuring systemic changes. And that framework really pointed to norms and networks being really critical aspects of what makes systemic change really endure, what makes it sticky. And over that same time period, we also worked on the development of what we call market system health indicators. So these are indicators that help get a sense of whether a market system is particularly healthy, where it's performing well, where it's kind of struggling. And so those also you're going to see us talk about further today. Starting in 2017, and the case study that we're really going to focus on today, we applied a lot of that research and thinking within the FTF and NOVA project in Mozambique. And from about 2019, we then used a lot of these tools, this thinking about market systems and measuring systemic change more generally, into how that really applies to understanding market systems resilience. Because obviously there's a lot of interaction between those things. Understanding how market systems change really also implies understanding how they're resilient, what makes them able to also withstand shocks and stressors. And so we realized that a lot of the work and thinking that had been done on ANOVA and elsewhere really would be helpful in also understanding the ways that market systems are resilient, but also ways in which they are maybe struggling to be resilient. And so that then wrapped up into something that we call the Dynamic System Resilience Index, the DSRI, which is something that we've been developing, applying, and refining since about 2019. So I'm conscious that too many frameworks makes everyone go to sleep. and I'm lucky that, that Tatiana actually shared a lot of that background USAID research. So in no way am I going to walk through all of this, but just to say this is what the DSRI looks like. You'll notice that the system elements on the left should really resonate and look familiar in terms of some of the research that was done by USAID. But to note that this also incorporated some of our own learning that I'd mentioned around measuring systemic change. For example, the inclusion of norms and networks being particularly prominent as the influence that both of those have on effective system stickiness. So we can go to the next slide. Yeah, here we go. So just a few examples of where we've applied DSRI. On the example we're going to talk to today, which is ANOVA, we have not applied the entire framework, but we have applied specific modules from it. And so we're going to dive into those specific modules and really get to the so what in terms of what we've learned and also what that's meant, how that we've used the kind of findings from that to really help inform decision-making about programming. But just to mention that we've also applied it in Ethiopia on a MSD program with refugees and host communities, in Uganda on a USAID funded program there that's focusing on various agricultural markets, as well as in Rwanda, focused on MSD for livestock. So I think all of those use cases have been really helpful to help understand differences in context. And I think we're going to dig into that a little bit when we talk about the lessons learned at the end of this presentation. So without any further ado or background, I'm now going to turn it over to Megan, who can really dive into the specifics. And just to echo what she said, I think we're really fortunate to have people like Bill Grant and Luca and Raul and many others here today that can also chime in and share many of their own contributions to what we're going to be talking about.
Thanks, Ben. Well, you've moved me on already to the next slide, so I'll just say, I think a lot of people on this network know ANOVA well, and also know the Mozambique context really well. Cyclones and flooding are recurrent. And so in some ways, Idai was not so much of a surprise, but it still was a significant shock that we faced during implementation. And so has COVID, which was less anticipated. And so I do think that the use of the market system resilience framework is really useful, but within that, the market system health tools that we've been using since the beginning of ANOVA have really proved useful. ANOVA, for those of you who do know it or don't know it, just to refresh you, is a 5-year, $21 million activity funded by USAID that's implemented by DAI with its partners, TechnoServe and MarketShare, and along with EBI. We're in our final year, and ANOVA has used an MSD approach to encourage the agricultural market system to evolve towards 2 very specific goals. You see them on this screen at the top. One is inclusive growth, and the other is resilience. And for us, those goals are reached through 2 major impacts. One of them is competitiveness. So for us, to make a very complex topic sound simple, what we really want is agribusinesses to be able to face competition. So being able to innovate how they do business to better serve farmers, basically, especially as they face more competition. It's a thin market, which we all know. The trust and cooperation impact that we seek towards achieving those goals is really that we simply want off-takers to invest more in producers and the services that are going to get higher value products. A lot of people have feared for several years side selling, because side selling is a norm of how business happened in Mozambique. So what incentives are there for an off-taker to invest in, a small scale farmer or a series of small businesses if, like aggregators that are not going to necessarily bring the product to them after they've outlaid the investment up front. And then finally, in terms of resilience, one of the things that we really wanted to make sure is that we kind of highlighted is, in addition to the shocks and stresses that have been faced over the last few years, particularly the cyclones, the flooding, COVID, there's also the challenge of poverty that has been an ongoing stress in the country, which I think a lot of people are aware of just in the world, how poor Mozambique is relative to other countries and how thin the agricultural market is. So part of our emergent TOC that you're seeing here on the screen, which was done last year in our beginning of our 4th year of implementation, was really articulating what changes in the market system we were contributing to and expected to continue to contribute to, and what we really thought was possible in that scenario. So let's move on and talk about specifically what we've measured and what's been the impact of that. So we've applied a range of tools on ANOVA. Since resilience, as I mentioned, is one of the goals, in addition to inclusive goal growth that we wanted to change, we really wanted to make sure we had a way to measure that and that we were all on board as a team of kind of what we were doing with that. So several of the modules of the index, like I mentioned, and associated tools we have used or piloted. I'm going to go through some of these. This is not an exhaustive list of all the tools that we've used. And for those of you who are familiar with these indices, there are several different ways to measure a lot of the different subcomponents. And so we're going to run through kind of a few of those and what we've done with those. Let's move to the next slide so we can go through the kind of first one. So first is when COVID started to be affecting internationally what people were talking about in terms of movement and practices and starting to put some initial shock to the system, we last year ran a very quick survey within 1 week of several different market actors to find out, okay, who's being affected and who's being affected most of different market actors. This was a very short survey that was done by telephone with a few questions just to be able to quickly gauge like where we were seeing the most stress on different market actors and their business operations. And here you can see that in this quick survey, we were seeing that input distributors were really feeling it the most earlier on. And then, over time, that does trickle down. So that was what we were first seeing. So I'm going to say the so what, since Raul has pushed me to say the so what on every single one of our slides. So the so what of this was last year, we started realizing there's a problem that the input distributors are facing. It's going to be felt throughout the whole supply chain. There should be some kind of way that we can react to that, not only in inputs, but also in supply chain with off-takers and output markets. So let's create a challenge fund to try to find out, what are those areas of operations that are being affected and what support could be given to be able to overcome that. And so the ANOVA team has had a challenge fund that this past year has gone live and been awarded to several different winners to address those challenges. So let's move on to the next slide. So in this research that we did that was looking at the subcomponent of networks within the index of resilience, one of the things that we did, I'm only showing a few of the graphs, I'm not showing all of the graphs of things. This was a much more robust survey over a longer period of time. This was primarily a qualitative survey. What we were trying to do here is trying to understand, how much of an effect have different shocks had over the past year and a half on market actors. And so on this one, I think we surveyed 175 different market actors on a 30 to 1 hour call where we discussed in a lot of the impacts and what they've meant for them. And what we saw here was that COVID was having more of a negative effect or impact than EDI was on the customer supplier relationships. And the so what of that was really that it was, okay, why is COVID and how is COVID having more of an effect than EDI. So that was something that we were able to explore with data we already had from the market system health modules, as well as other questions on that same assessment. And some of the things that we were seeing was the real stress on logistics, some of the other concerns over financing, that because of the longer term stress that COVID continues to have on many market actors, it really was having a more negative effect than the EDI. We haven't delved into tons of that on like, well, what are we going to do about that, except that the Challenge Fund, as I mentioned in the previous slide, has helped kind of pinpoint what Innova could do with certain market actors to overcome some of those challenges. Let's maybe move to the next one. We can delve into all of this more in the panel discussion as well. So I think one of the things I mentioned earlier on was that because it's a thin market and because competitiveness, which means how well can a market actor really face competition for us in the system, not just that it's a thin market, but how well, when you do have competition, can you innovate and who are you innovating towards, was really important for us over the whole course of Innova. And when COVID was introduced to this market system, what we've seen and what you can't see here, but I have data on as well, is that, you know, a lot of people felt like they were forced to innovate in the face of COVID, how they were doing operations, what services they were offering, what products they could deliver. And so, yes, we were seeing about 60% of our respondents were saying, in the face of COVID, I felt like I need to innovate. But COVID has not been the only driver of innovation. In fact, we're seeing more and more innovation pre-COVID and then since COVID over the past 2 years, since our baseline on innovation that we've measured, because we think that it's really important to see a diversity in terms of the products and services that are offered in the marketplace and by different types of actors. Let me move in a little bit closer on this slide of some of the so what. So our baseline, let's stay on the slide. Yeah, our baseline basically showed us that there was very little innovation in the system of the way we break down the system. Input distribution network, which is really about, you know, getting inputs to farmers and all of the different actors involved in that, was the highest, but even that was, you know, out of a scale of 0 to 1 was about 0.4. You can see, you know, 2 years later, we're seeing a very high score on that. To us, that average index is now up to a 1. We were hearing that every different actor involved in that was, you know, doing something differently and innovating either the types of products or the types of services they were offering, or even potentially offering new brands. One of the really interesting things here was we were seeing more and more innovation towards a segment of the market that hadn't been the priority for a lot of these actors before, which is that smallholder farmer segment. The other thing that I think is really just noticeable, since we always talk about the thin market here, is support services system really refers to those services that enable farmers not only to get inputs, but to produce and then their produce to get to end markets. And so that can be a range of different services from, you know, marketing, from different actors that are trying to get them inputs to, you know, selling their Mozambican products at supermarkets. And at the beginning of Innova, we were seeing, you know, that the market was so thin that the innovation towards new services directed towards, you know, smallholder farmers was quite low, 0.1. And, you know, when we just finished this at the end of last year, we were seeing 0.53. So for us, that was quite encouraging to see all of this innovation, because one of the things that we've really stressed is that in a market where we're looking for change, what we were looking for change was not that everything had success, but that we saw more innovation and we saw more market actors feeling like they could face competition. The The so what of this is actually that because the market has become more diverse and innovative, we actually have had a situation on Innova where some of our partners in the input sector have actually found facing competition harder. And they've brought this to us. I'm not going to mention them by name, but now Innova is actually offering services to help some of those partners that we've been working with for a couple of years understand their share of the market and what's happening to it now. I'm going to move us to the next slide, which I think is the last one I'll speak on, which is on commercial norms. So since the beginning, we've been saying, and our framework really stresses that norms are important, especially commercial norms. So we broke those down in subcomponents. Again, I won't go into all of those now, but what I find really interesting here is that we've seen both trust and cooperation in a system where there was very little incentive for off-takers to trust that other market actors wouldn't engage in side selling. So they therefore didn't see much in motivation to invest in the smallholder farmer segment. We're seeing a real change in that, a real shift. And what I mean by that is, you can see here in the numbers, but like reliability, which is a key part of trust, which means a consumer expects that the provider will do what they say they will do for their consumers. So I say that I expect that you, K2, are going to provide me the seeds at the high quality you said you would in time for planting, has really gone up from 0.5 at the baseline to 2 at the end of last year. Even in the face of these shocks, to see that score go up is quite encouraging. And similarly, when we look at cooperation and some of our subcomponents there, one of the things that we're seeing is, providers believe that consumers will actually value a relationship with them enough to make efforts to maintain it, meaning they're not just going to go, providers no longer believe that consumers are just going to go where it's cheapest, that they're actually going to show loyalty as a customer to certain firms. So this could be loyalty to an input firm. This could be loyalty to a retailer that sells, the vegetables that are grown in Mozambique. This could be, efforts that you make to pay just a little bit more, or maybe you pay the same, but you're going to make concerted effort over time to cooperate with those actors over others. It's not just price or convenience that is determining all of your transactions over time. And for us, this last finding we found really interesting, and we will be releasing a report with all of our analysis that kind of goes alongside these norms that we've seen change over time. So look for that shortcoming or forthcoming from Innova, and hopefully it'll be helpful for you and resonate, and feel free to ask us questions as well. I think we have one more slide about the so what here, Ben. Yeah, and I don't know if you want to talk.
Yeah, well, just in the interest of time, I'm wondering if we should maybe bypass this one and wait to see what comes out in the question and answer. But yeah, I assume we may end up speaking to these once we dig into the discussion.
Thank you so much to the MSA team. That was incredibly insightful, Megan. The detail that you provided as it relates to the Mozambique application of your tool is also something that I think rings extremely relevant for those of us that are connected to the call. So I think maybe what we'll go ahead and do now is we can shift into the panel discussion. And maybe what we'll do is we're kind of tracking some of the questions in the chat. So please continue to plug in some questions. I know that Chris Nicoletti of ID is also trying to support in answering, so thanks for that. To start off, maybe I'll kick off a question to Tatiana, who's been quiet for some time, but I'm sure has a lot of things to share. Tatiana, I'm wondering if you can maybe speak a little bit to how market systems resilient measurement is making its way into the future of the broader USAID strategy. And more specifically, kind of a follow-up question to that is, how do you see this rolling out in forthcoming programming from USAID?
Yeah, sure. So this is becoming front and center in what it is and how it is that we do business within USAID, and how it is that we develop and design programming within USAID. So as an example, as I mentioned, within the Feed the Future initiative, which is the US President's Global Food Security and Hunger Initiative, that's funded at over $1 billion annually, we are developing a new strategy around how we implement a new country plans. And market systems resilience is at the front and center in terms of what we expect to see and what we expect to design programming on. And so it's becoming a core tenet in general, also within the resilience stream. So not just market systems resilience, but community level resilience, household level resilience. We are definitely prioritizing and elevating that because our administrator understands that a lot of these world crises and problems that are affecting us all at these different levels require a certain approach and understanding around resilience. So that, I think, is a very strong signal in terms of how us as a donor are really prioritizing resilience in all spaces, including in the market system development space. And then in terms of programming, as I mentioned, by incorporating this in our broader agency strategies around these key funding streams, we are expecting then that future activities, as they are designed and implemented, will also tackle this question and implement activities and support to bolster market systems resilience.
Thank you so much, Tatiana. That's helpful, and I think that context is really relevant, especially as we look to the Mozambique space as it stands right now. We are all very well aware that there are a lot of different programs that might be coming through the pipeline that aim to kind of meet this gap of how do we really address market systems resilience at a household and at a systems level as well. So maybe one of the questions that I would like to pose to both Lina and maybe the folks at MSA, I think you all spoke a little bit to the similarities in the findings between the MSRI and the DSRIs, more specifically kind of to see that the results on the impact of COVID and environmental shocks are similar between both tools. And so I think it would be really interesting, Megan, if you maybe could speak to, or Ben as well, the similarities and differences between the MSRI and the DSRI as you all know it. And Lina, please feel free to jump in here as well.
Ben, you want to take it away?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think those were a couple of the points that we were going to maybe touch on in the lessons learned. So this might be a good time now to speak to a few of them. I think one of the things that's been nice for those who don't know, IDE and MSA actually share office space in Denver. So we're frequently quite physically close to each other, as well as the taking advantage of that for batting around ideas. So as we've been working on MSR, it's been nice over time to have a chance to throw some ideas back and forth between us. And I think one of the things, there are a few differences, I think, in terms of, elements of which parts of our respective frameworks, or maybe emphasizing one thing a little bit more than another, or that kind of thing. But I think that's maybe a little less interesting than just the experiences that we've had on how we've rolled it out. And I think one thing that was really interesting to hear from IDE was the kind of evolution over time of the different ways that it's been rolled out. I think there might be some similarities in some senses from MSA's side in terms of understanding what is the appropriate scale of rollout. I think you saw on Innova for us that we rolled out particular modules rather than the full index. And I think that's something that we've really been observing, is that, there are so many elements that are important when you think about resilience. And I think Tatiana's slides show all the different dimensions and components that are part of it. Something that's really, though, come to us as a real finding is that it's really important to have some consideration up front about what really are the critical things to know within that context, within the context of likely shocks and stressors in that system. And so that's meant that we aren't always of the opinion that you need to roll out every module. It may not always be appropriate. And given how much there is to, within resilience, that also means that there's not always, there's a real need to think through how lean or how kind of comprehensive you want to be in measurement. And I think we've really done both, depending upon the nature of the program, available resources, et cetera, because it isn't always possible, in at least our own experience, to do, a full-blown measurement of all of the modules, all of the aspects.
And I would take her as well.
That's helpful.
Yes, thank you, Ben. Well, on our side, we said yes, our index is a strong quantitative measure, and as it's not only being implemented in Mozambique but also in other countries, and this speaks to another question that was in the chat. It's where do you get the balance between like comparability across times and different places and local geographies, and localizing a tool to a context. So that's where we've been always balancing, but we are really looking forward for the tool to allow us to understand different, like comparing scenarios across time and different places. So we've been trying to be very consistent on the determinants and how they are quantified.
Thanks, Lina. And we have a question in the chat that I think is relevant right now, which is from Hans. And he's asking Megan if maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on how MSA is integrating market systems resilience indicators in program/system monitoring. Megan, would you be able to speak a little bit to that point?
Yeah, sure. So, so on our actual PMP that we have, you'll notice that trust and cooperation are baselined, and that we've done follow-up assessments of trust and cooperation. So for us, trust and cooperation are two of those norms that we thought were really important. And similarly, innovation, the Business Innovation Index, for us is something that we had already flagged at the startup as something that was really important to us to understanding, the system and how resilient it would be. How many different services and products are you seeing that are being offered towards the smallholder farmer segment? So I think from the outset, we set up our whole MEL plan, and you can find our MEL plan on a shameless plug right now for the deck. There are two iterations of it. The 2019 version is the updated version, but you can find out more on kind of how we set it up from the beginning to really hone in on those subcomponents of the MSRI. I think what we found over time was that resilience in and of itself was something that we wanted to understand, like what are we trying to get them to be resilient? What do we want the market to be resilient to? And what does bounce back really look like? And so for us, that really became these like quick actionable surveys, I think became more and more something that we found with partners to be useful. So yes, we've been looking at the system over time from the very beginning, but that linking of like the system to like what is Innova actually doing is what really interested our team. So we were working with a big output player, an off-taker. I'll just give an example of Alam, for example, who were making lots of purchases last year, the previous year. And one of the things that we added onto surveys was, throughout the growing season, how much do you trust that Alam is actually going to buy your product? Because there's historically been problems there. And we already were seeing stresses in both climatic stresses, and we were seeing, now the stresses of COVID, do you really think that they're going to come by? And that for us was a way of gauging side selling. Were we seeing a change in this in this real norm. Like we were getting the assessment scores of yes, but like with the partners we were actually working, could we say that we were seeing this change? And I think for us, that's been really useful, both at like the agent level, but at the system level, to look at similar concepts so we could draw the connections between our work and system level change as well. Feel free others to chime in on the program and other panelists.
I don't know if any of the other panelists have anything to add to this specific question. I'm seeing that Mohammed Fallah has his hand up. If you would like to maybe unmute yourself and raise a question, feel free to do that.
Muito obrigado. Não tenho necessariamente uma questão, mas sendo estudos que foram feitos e nós como ICM temos trabalhado na questão de mercado, sobretudo na comercialização, interessa dizer que qualquer dos estudos são muito importantes, vão ajudar a resiliência. Hoje há choques diversos que nós temos que olhar, e em Moçambique é só para ajudar, pela minha experiência de 32 anos a trabalhar em matérias destas, uma das coisas que eu olho nos mercados para sermos resilientes é a própria organização dos mercados. Por isso, eu defendo e já defendi ao nível do Ministério da Indústria e Comércio, Moçambique deve ter nos próximos anos um regulamento sobre mercados e feiras para disciplinar a organização. Conheço um pouco o país, passei há pouco tempo de Mandimba, estive em Coamba, estive em Tsangano, estive na Marávia. Tu notas as feiras, aquilo é uma desorganização. Então, e é um mercado também. A troca dos produtos, tu vês que o produtor, o intermediário, o pequeno, fica desfavorecido. É capaz do estrangeiro, Bangladesh ou outro, vender uma capulana que custa 100 meticais, vender a 300 meticais em troca de produtos agrícolas. Estou a falar de gergelim, outro. Este é um aspecto. O outro aspecto que eu defendo é que é aquilo que dizia uma das apresentações fortemente, é preciso a resiliência passar pelo envolvimento muito forte das lideranças comunitárias. Entrosar as lideranças comunitárias no processo. Um aspecto que eu acho que é importante, sobretudo de produtos agrícolas, é que quando o produto agrícola vai para o mercado, vai desfavorecido por causa da própria qualidade do grão, quer de umidade, quer questões de pós-colheita. Então, tecnologias de pós-colheita são importantes para a própria comunidade ser resiliente dele próprio. E queria concordar com um dos estudos. Moçambique hoje está a avançar para processos em que tu tens que olhar, estilo um rio, a montante, a parte da produção, a cadeia de valor tem que olhar a montante e tem que olhar a jusante. E isto o que é que eu quero dizer? Hoje o feijão Boer tem mercado internacional. O gergelim já começa a ter mercado internacional. A soja, infelizmente, somos pequenos produtores, mas a China compra toda a soja que Moçambique produzir. 30, 40, 50 mil. Mas eu defendo que a soja não pode ser exportada porque nós temos que atacar a cadeia de valor do frango em Moçambique. Mesmo para terminar, dizer que isto, olha, estou a dar uma informação só para ajudar aos jovens que estudaram. Em Nacala hoje estão mais de 800 contentores, não conseguem sair. Pelo efeito do Covid, diminui os barcos, navios para exportar. No mercado internacional, o que é que aconteceu? Só um exemplo. Começamos em julho com preço de 35 meticais do feijão Boer para o mercado e hoje baixou porque Nacala não está a conseguir levar para os mercados internacionais. À espera de navio. Portanto, o efeito do Covid internacional está a afetar em Moçambique na balança comercial e na balança de pagamento, provavelmente. Então, eram só alguns subsídios que era importante partilhar convosco. Agora, internamente, tenho estado a fazer os trabalhos sobre esta cimeira que vai surgir da política, sistemas da política alimentar, da FAO, das Nações Unidas, e acho que um dos aspectos que tem que se escrever na resiliência, a resiliência das famílias moçambicanas terem melhores sistemas de alimentação para resolver o problema da nutrição. Muito obrigado pelo tempo que me dispensaram. Thank you very much.
Obrigada, Sr. Vala. De facto, o senhor levanta vários pontos que são extremamente relevantes para a nossa discussão e até vai nos puxando mais numa abordagem relacionada a o que estes estudos realmente querem dizer num contexto prático para o nosso país. Se calhar eu gostaria de pedir a palavra da Lina, que falasse um pouquinho mais sobre como é que nós poderíamos abordar alguns pontos que foram levantados pelo Sr. Vala, nomeadamente a necessidade de estruturar o mercado e realmente termos já insumos de qualidade, né? E como é que nós podemos utilizar estas avaliações e estes estudos para apoiar um ecossistema que seja mais funcional. Então, Lina, se tu consegues falar um pouco mais sobre o trabalho que nós na IDE estamos a fazer com as feiras agrícolas e como é que isso está incorporando esta análise de resiliência. Obrigada.
So thank you very much, Mohammed. The point on the first is like we couldn't agree more. We know about all the challenges about implementing fairs, and because of them, we've been implementing fairs where we only allow retailers, agro-dealers, and input suppliers that have all their documents in place. This particularly to try to ensure that the quality of the seeds and the products that are sold in the fairs have the highest quality, and that this feedback loop that we were talking before, it's ensured. Like we are linking face-to-face these agro dealers with the farmers, and if the product let's say if the seed doesn't germinate, if the product is not of good quality, we have created this link in between them. So this is one of the requirements that we have for all the agro dealers, input suppliers, and retailers to participate in our fairs. And so another point that I touched a little bit at the end, it's important that this is not always regarded as this is just, let's say, a subsidy, and it's 100%. So now we're working progressively to start increasing the participation of the farmers in the voucher that they have, the allowance that they have in the fairs. And we do try to foster the participation of agro dealers and input suppliers that are local, and avoid these other middlemen that Mohammed was talking about. Mohammed raised so many different questions, but one of the other important results that we saw for output markets was that actually this obstruction of goods and regulations because of COVID, like imports and exports and all these big output market actors, particularly for Jerusalem and Feijão, haven't been able to make their exports reach particularly India or Pakistan and others. So that has been a problem that hasn't been solved yet. Like the frequency and of navios, it's still quite below than pre-COVID levels. Natasha, I don't know if I answered all your questions.
Yeah, that was That was very, very helpful. Another point that has kind of come up in the chats as well, and through some of the analysis that was done by MarketShare Associates and also IDE, is the question of the output side of the market in the Mozambique context as well. I think it would be really interesting for us to kind of spend a little bit of time talking about how MSA and IDE are going to use learnings from the various index in a practical perspective to maybe support more the output side of the market. Megan, you spoke a little bit to different approaches that were being taken to support partners to understand their share of the market, a challenge fund as well. Lina, you've spoken a little bit to the input side of things, but it would be maybe really interesting to hear a bit more, some thoughts on how we can really address the supply chain management and the output and offtake markets. I don't know if folks have any thoughts to share on that point.
I definitely have some thoughts. I'm sure my colleagues on the line have some thoughts too. I mean, so ANOVA's been working with partners to innovate different solutions, see if we can change behaviors of the market system by introducing different innovations with partners. And one of those has been on this logistics point. So how can you make it profitable to improve the logistics from the smallholder farmer producer to the end retailer, so that Mozambicans can consume more Mozambican products rather than the produce that's coming from their neighboring countries, which is very common. And so we've been piloting some of those, just like, for instance, backhauling with trucks, getting some of the trucking companies to be able to sell some of the produce that they collect from smallholder farmers in local points, which are aggregation points. There are different innovations that we've been trying to do to try with the output market to make market system changes or encourage market system changes, not only in logistics and transport of the supply chain, but also this whole point that I got on the norms about like getting real multinational companies, but also domestic companies like Carretera to invest in solutions with smallholder farmers, invest in smallholder farmers, really think that the smallholder farmer is going to sell you their produce and not side sell it, because that's what's prevented innovation over time. And I do think that COVID has, we've seen this from our responses to different assessments, has encouraged people to that bonding capital, as we call it, that like rely on each other more. That relationship you have, check in with them on WhatsApp, ask them when somebody's coming through with a truck. And we've seen requests for trucks. We've seen requests for more frequent contact. We've seen those kind of things come through the Challenge Fund and other applications. So I do think that that's where we're trying to follow the traction and innovation that there is in the system, but other colleagues feel free to jump in.
And well, on our side, we've seen also the importance of, let's say, this character of ours that is called Farmer Business Advisor, that in creating sustainable linkages. So we've seen that for the case of last mile, there's producers that are not able to sell their product because they don't have a way to reach to a market, rather because they don't have the support to aggregate the enough production for an aggregator to come and source their thing, or because they don't know where the price it's good, because they don't know where the demand is. So for one of our findings is information it's very, very important. And in those places where these retailers that are on the ground are linked to the farmers, informing them about weather information, when to plant, where in the market the price is higher for a certain product, where are other producers that they can collaborate and aggregate production. So these are the linkages that we've seen that are effective, creating resilience. That basically it's a win to win. The farmers are working together and they are linked to this other person that are creating the linkages to the other part of the market that it's absolutely unavailable or very far away to the market. So it's creating these linkages and strengthening these linkages through various different interventions as information, transport, and so on.
If I may as well, I think one of the things that we've also seen in understanding more of the market systems resilience from a global context and the research that we're seeing, particularly in light of the pandemic, to Lena's point, is the maintenance, right? Resilience being the maintenance of some of these functions within the market. Technology and digitization are more and more playing a critical role, and that's what we're seeing in maintaining those information flows that Lena is speaking about. And so I think one area going forward that we're probably more interested in exploring as well here at USAID is to what extent does that technology and digitization within that market space help, right, in maintaining resilience of the market against shocks and stresses such as the pandemic, such as natural catastrophes, so on and so forth.
Yeah, that's a really valid point, and I think both Megan, Tatiana, and Lena, all of you have kind of touched on one of the findings that emerged out of both tools, which is really kind of the mid-size market actors. And I think one of the questions that we ask ourselves as implementers oftentimes is kind of the role of that middleman and the figure of maybe an agro-dealer or a retailer, and how can we kind of reduce the route to market cost in order to increase demand at a household level as well. So that's it's a valid point, and it's validating to also see that both instruments are kind of speaking to that. One of the questions that I kind of wanted to raise here is when we talk about these resilience assessments, and I think we had a really productive conversation on the practical applications of what that means from a programmatic perspective, I was wondering if maybe I can ask MSA and Lena to speak a little bit to how to capture the in-depth data using these tools like MSRI or DSRI in the wake of a shock or a stress. So essentially, I mean, how often does the data collection occur? Is it something that is maintained with a given frequency, or is it done in the wake of, you have a shock and then you kind of conduct this assessment? So if maybe you can speak a little bit to what that looks like.
I can go first. So the 4 questionnaires for each respective market actor, it's a very, very comprehensive tool. The household questionnaire takes around 1 hour and 20 minutes, depending on if we need translation for local language or not. The ones with the input for the market actors takes around 45 minutes, and we're talking about 130 questions or in average. We have mandatory and non-mandatory questions. The non-mandatory are the ones that are more qualitative. So it's like, let's say, do you face difference between your different input suppliers in terms of quality, price, or distance? And they will then give a further explanation on this. To be honest, this is something that is in our table. We have so much information to keep on analyzing and disaggregating. For example, I don't know, we have all the metrics that we have. We can easily disaggregate them by just gender and see how different are women to men in terms of supply or demand. For future data collections, we are envisioning to have data collection every year and see. Obviously, we will reassess if this is the right frequency to collect the MSRI. If we see changes or if we don't see substantial changes, that could change. But we're aiming to apply this in other countries. And regarding the question of shocks, this is one of the most comprehensive modules or sections of our questionnaire, and we really dig into what's the difference of that. We separate between climatic shocks, socioeconomic shocks, and public health, and that's where COVID fits in. And it's if they've been able to recover, how long they took recover how these affect the linkages to their inputs or to sell their outputs, how these change the prices where they commercialized. So it's basically an infinite combination of information to analyze. And we can't wait to put our hands more into this aggregation of all this rich information that we have. What we presented was really the very tip of the iceberg in just like market actors and the topics that were most important for this, but there's so much more.
From our side, I think ours is a little bit different in that we've only used some modules of the MSRI. So, or for us, it's the DSRI, but we do that big assessment every 2 years. So, because we consider those slow moving variables. So the full like 1 hour long survey, we only do every 2 years. The market system health modules, we do every quarter, regardless of shock or no shock. And then that rapid survey that you were seeing, like the responses, we do that like on demand. And we also do those like related to very specific interventions. So we look into some of the slow moving variables, like elements of those, even on our partnerships. And that's kind of like as needed or like as affected by something. So at the agent level. So the agent level measurement happens a lot more frequently and is often very like related to a very specific thing that occurs and that we want to know more about and take some action about. And the slow moving variables is a slower cycle of data collection. So every 2 years.
Thank you both to Nina and Megan for those insights. I'm going to maybe start wrapping us up on this panel, taking a look to time. And I kind of wanted to close with one question that is open to all of us. Please, Tatiana and MSA and IDE colleagues as well, feel free to jump in. I think one of the really fun things, having also been heavily involved in this whole process of MSRI, right, is for us in the Mozambique context, it's really thinking about how we can take these results and translating them in a way that results in actionable change for the communities and the clients that we work with. But in order to do that, we obviously have a long way ahead of us, including ensuring government engagements as well. If I can ask the panelists to maybe give maybe a couple takeaways or recommendations in terms of what is the best way for us as researchers, as analysts in this kind of technical and abstract MSRI and DSRI space to take our learnings and our research and make it digestible and to ensure buy-in? What would be the recommendations from the panelists on the best way to do that?
Well, that's a very difficult question. Well, for our MSRI, there were some things that were quite clear, particularly when we were talking on the determinant of an enabling environment. When we were talking with the market actors, it was clear that for them, the government, instead of supporting, made things more difficult. Speaking for output market actors, saying that certain regulations for exporting and reaching certain requirements were making the government, the business very difficult. For input suppliers, the same, that the entry barriers for the business are very high and actually favor businesses from outside. And this is talking a little bit to what Megan was saying. The market, it's very, very thin, and the big players are not national. So this is a huge recommendation that the government needs to support national big players for them to be the ones distributing and providing the market instead of Zimbabwean products or South African products. So in terms of making the research useful for the government, I think we need to really work out on concrete recommendations for the government, but there's a lot of stuff that we can share in regards with creating a better enabling environment for the market supply side.
Yeah, I would say from my side, And this is more at the agent level that we tend to do this than the systems level, but I try to do it at the systems level too, is I always insist that questionnaires are too long. This is like my big pet peeve. Like, this is people's time. We're not paying them for their time. Like, it's hard enough. We all know they're hard burden. And now we're going to go to them with a 3-hour survey every 2 to 3 months. Like, no way. So knowing what kind of decisions we'd like to make, or what kind of action we'd like to take at the onset before administering all of the indice questions that we have. So that's why we're only using some modules in Mozambique. And that, you know, we get through what we get through and really prioritizing that. It's really hard, even with the national and international companies that are working in Mozambique. So recently I tried, just as an example, with Bayer. They're trying something new in this COVID environment. We tried to like do a questionnaire that is only 2 questions, and Bayer was like, no, if I'm getting support from USAID, I want more than 2 questions. I want like the 20 to 25 questionnaire at least, so I get lots of data from you. Like, big data is somehow better. No, like, let's make sure that we have questions that we have answers to that are actionable, and that we know what we can do with, not just really interesting to have. And so I would say digestible, like, resilience is already really difficult for a lot of people to understand. So anything that we can make really clear to them, like why we're using their time and what we're going to do about it, is my preference. And I will continue to advocate for that, even if I'm the only person in the room saying that.
Yeah, Natasha, to your point, I think I can answer this question in 2 ways. And one of the ways is, as Megan is inferring, I think it starts with knowing who you want to communicate to and what are they interested in. And in that sense, relationships matter, whether it's from the national government, local government, or a private company, association. What is it that they're interested in? Where is it that they're experiencing their bottlenecks? And then what information are you collecting that would be particularly useful to them in their decision making? And to get at that, you need to have those relationships and be sensitive to you know, the challenges and experiences that they might be having within the market. I think the second answer to your question in terms of digestible, and this I think maybe gets to a question that Sunil from Agra was posing in the comment box, was about, well, is there a standard? Are there best practices around this area that could be communicated out? And that's particularly what USAID is interested in finding out. I don't think that we're there yet. I think this is still a very new and emerging field. Like I said, we are seeing initial signs, for example, that technology and digitization are very important in ensuring consistency within a market. And so, you know, for us, it's exploring a little bit more from the ground up, from the experiences that different market actors are having, the information that they are needing to really build that up and see if there's any universal best practices that are not as context specific as we currently see them, that could be brought out and then communicated out to our wider community.
Thank you so much to all of the panelists, and Tatiana, that was a beautiful way to close our session today. Thank you very much for that. I think that really the take-home message here, and one of the things that both, you know, Lina, Megan, and Tatiana are speaking to today, is that there's a long road ahead of us, and that there's really innovative things that are going on in the ground, but that we still have a quest to find the right fit. So with that, maybe I will once again thank the panelists and thank all of the participants for kind of joining us and having such an active discussion in the chat. This was a very kind of technical concept, but I think that all of the panelists did a really great job of breaking it down in a way that was easier for us to understand. And I will pass the ball back to the organizers of the event. Ercilia, over to you.
Thank you very much, Natasha, and thank you very much as well to all of our panelists. Thank you for also to our audience from everywhere for making the time to participate. Thank you as well for all of the contributions that we've received. We are indeed, you know, this is, as Natasha has said, and as has been said extensively, this is a topic that we have to continue to discuss and to explore and to really see how we can actually bring to bear in the reality of the context in Mozambique, for sure. I also wanted to just kind of take the opportunity to invite you all to kind of continue the conversation to a certain extent in the next event that we're going to have, which is also going to be hosted incidentally by Innova, where they are actually going to be talking a little bit more about how they have been over the past 5 years using innovation to strengthen supply chains so that indeed access to domestic market and can become more of a reality and easier to do, especially in this environment in which we are, where everyone has really been pulled to look internally and to look domestically. So as I think it's a really good segue to this, and that event is actually going to happen on the 21st of this month, so only some 3 weeks away. So we hope that you'll be able to join us then. We will be sending out more information about that very soon. And as well, we will also be sharing again the recordings from this session, as well as the presentations that we have received. So again, thank you for all the resources that have been shared on the chat. If there are any additional resources that anyone who is attending today would like to share with the broader group, please feel free to send that through to us. And as well, if you have not yet, please do register to be part of the MSDN network to continue to receive our communication and to be included. So thank you once again. This was fantastic, everyone. And we hope that you have a good day further, wherever you are.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Oh, actually, before you go, maybe could we do a family picture? If everyone could just switch on videos and we can have a quick picture before everybody disappears.
The cameras.
Yes, the cameras. Oh, what did I say? I'm going to ask my colleague Ignacio to help us with the practicality of it all.
I only appeared to take a picture.
Well, you're welcome to do that. You're welcome to do that. We're glad you did.
Thank you.
All right, I see everybody has their pictures on. Let me just double check if Ignacio is ready for us. Ignacio, will you let us know when we need to smile to the camera? Ignacio, you're on mute. Can we smile?
I love how everybody is awkwardly smiling. I'm just moving through the tiles and it's pretty funny.
I know. Okay, let me see, because I don't know whether Ignacio is in a different country. So perhaps we should. Great, I captured one. I got a good picture. Fantastic. Thank you, everybody. I just want to try to take one more because I realize there's a lot of us on the line. And that's good. All right. Thank you again. Have a fantastic day further. And keep safe. And we will see you on the 21st.
Yes, thank you.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye.
Thank you.